Cartman remembers every death. Kenny McCormick has died over 100 times, and almost nobody in South Park remembers a single one of them. The mechanism itself is confirmed canon, established directly in the show. Kenny's parents are active members of a Cthulhu cult, and every time Kenny dies, his mother gives birth to him again that same night, his body regrowing to the exact age he was before death. Everyone in town has their memory wiped clean. Stan screams. Kyle calls them bastards, and by the next episode, none of it happened. A perfect, horrifying loop repeated over 100 times, treated by the entire town as something that simply never occurred. Except Cartman. In multiple episodes across the show's run, Cartman references Kenny's deaths casually, as established fact, completely unbothered by knowledge that should be impossible for him to possess. Fans mapped two separate explanations across the show's own continuity. In one storyline, Cartman receives an eye transplant, using Kenny's frozen head as the donor source. In another, Cartman drinks Kenny's ashes mixed into milk and experiences a flood of Kenny's memories as his soul temporarily possesses him. Either event could explain a permanent biological link that bypasses the memory wipe applied to everyone else. But the theory's darkest layer isn't the mechanism, it's the implication. Cartman, the single most cruel and morally bankrupt child in South Park, is the only person on Earth who has watched his supposed friend die in every conceivable horrific way over 100 times and felt nothing approaching grief or horror. He simply filed it away as information. A person capable of that isn't just desensitized. He may not actually experience empathy at all. South Park was built on a curse. South Park is a small, unremarkable mountain town in Colorado that experiences catastrophic, world-ending events on a near-weekly basis. Alien invasions, government conspiracies unraveling in real time, demonic possessions, global pandemics originating in elementary school cafeterias. The show presents this concentration of chaos as simply the premise, the comedic reality of life in a specific fictional town. The theory built across multiple forums and TV tropes pages says the concentration has an explanation rooted in the town's actual founding history. A deep dive into the show's expanded lore, including its video game continuity, traces South Park's founding population back to refugees from a coastal settlement connected to ancient supernatural entities and forbidden pacts made generations earlier. Specific named ancestors connect directly to current South Park residents. An ancestor tied to the Marsh family bloodline, an ancestor tied to the Garrison family. And critically, ancestors connected to both Cartman and Kenny's families, sharing common lineage whose supernatural inheritance originally doomed the coastal settlement these families fled. South Park wasn't randomly selected as the universe's preferred location for chaos. The theory says it was specifically built as a resettlement site for a cursed bloodline, and every catastrophic event concentrated in that town is the ancient pact working exactly as designed. The show has been staging a centuries-old supernatural consequence inside a children's animated comedy, and the kids who experience it most consistently are the ones who carry the oldest bloodline. Cartman is consistently right. Eric Cartman is, by every measure the show presents, calculating, cruel, prejudiced, and willing to destroy anyone who stands between him and what he wants. None of that is disputed by the show, by the other characters, or by anyone who has watched more than 3 episodes. But track his actual predictions and schemes across 25 years of episodes and an uncomfortable pattern emerges. Cartman is disproportionately, almost suspiciously, often right about things nobody else in South Park believes, until events prove him correct. His conspiracy theories land. His read on people's hidden motivations, while delivered with maximum cruelty, frequently turns out to be accurate. His understanding of how systems can be manipulated, how institutions function beneath their stated values, how people will behave when their self-interest conflicts with their stated principles, outpaces every other character in the show by a wide margin. The theory says this isn't coincidence. It's the show's actual thesis about the relationship between cruelty and clarity. Cartman doesn't care about anyone's feelings, which means he doesn't filter reality to protect them. He doesn't need the world to be a certain way, so he can see it as it actually is. Stan and Kyle keep Cartman around, not despite his manipulative cruelty, but partly because of what that cruelty grants access to. He's wrong about almost everything that matters morally, but he's right, with disturbing frequency, about almost everything that matters practically. And the show has spent 25 years never quite resolving what that says about the relationship between being a terrible person and being the only one in the room who accurately sees what's happening. The town's water is poisoning everyone. The show itself establishes, in a storyline the writers play for comedy and then abandon without resolution, that Lake Quahog is severely contaminated. The environmental damage is acknowledged, treated as a minor background detail, and never addressed with the remediation it would require in any real municipal context. The theory takes that detail seriously and runs the math against what's actually documented about long-term, low-level exposure to contaminated water sources, progressive cognitive decline, increasingly poor impulse control, mood instability, and a gradual erosion of the basic behavioral regulation that prevents most people from making catastrophically self-destructive decisions. Track the residents of South Park across the show's full run, and the deterioration is not subtle. Randy Marsh begins the series as a functioning geologist with recognizable, if flawed, adult judgment. By the later seasons, his behavior has escalated to a level that in a real-world context would require intervention rather than comedy framing. Mr. Garrison's trajectory, already extreme in the early episodes, accelerates into territory the show can barely contain within its satirical structure. The children who live closest to the contamination zone and spend the most time outdoors near the town's water systems consistently display the most extreme behavioral patterns. The theory says South Park was never a quirky fictional town with an unusually high tolerance for chaos. It is a town being slowly, chemically altered, and the show has been documenting the deterioration in plain sight for 25 years without ever naming what's causing it. Kenny is a Christ figure. Kenny McCormick has died repeatedly, returns each time without his own death, persisting in his conscious memory beyond himself, and exists in a near-permanent state of poverty and suffering that the show frames as almost sacrificial, a child who absorbs catastrophic, repeated death, so the town around him never fully processes what loss actually costs. The theory's most cited evidence comes directly from the show's own creative commentary. Trey Parker acknowledged, in material surrounding a specific Christmas-themed episode, a deliberate correlation drawn between the in-universe death of the show's Jesus character and Kenny's simultaneous reappearance within that same episode. The timing wasn't accidental set dressing, it was a structural choice, specifically connecting Kenny's resurrection cycle to the show's in-universe Christ figure. At a moment, the writers chose to make the parallel visible. The theory extends from that acknowledgement. Kenny dies for the town repeatedly. He returns each time, without ceremony or recognition. His suffering is treated as background noise by everyone who witnesses it. He is poor, overlooked, and consistently placed in danger by the casual indifference of a community that has made his deaths structurally invisible. He exists to absorb what the town cannot hold. Whether the show intended Kenny as a genuine theological parallel, or whether the connection emerged from 2 decades of running the same gag past the point where it became something else entirely, the overlap between Kenny's cycle and the show's own in-universe Christ figure is documented, acknowledged, and too structurally specific to entirely dismiss. Stan is experiencing depression. Stan Marsh begins the series as the group's most recognizable moral center, the boy who most consistently registers that something is wrong with the situations around him and most consistently articulates why. He is the closest thing South Park has to a protagonist with a functioning conscience. Then the show shifts him. Beginning around season 15, Stan's character undergoes a transformation that the show frames as cynicism, but that the theory reads as something considerably more clinical. In the episode Asperger's, Stan develops a condition in which everything around him literally looks and smells like excrement. The world becomes a waste product to him. The people he loves become indistinguishable from everything that disgusts him. His solution is alcohol. He begins drinking as a child, specifically to restore a tolerable version of reality, to chemically reconstruct the filter through which the world used to seem manageable and occasionally worth engaging with. The theory says the show documented the onset of a genuine depressive episode in a child character, described it with surprising clinical accuracy, and then never fully resolved it because the show found the resulting cynicism useful rather than requiring it to be addressed. Stan's increasing detachment in later seasons, his willingness to step back from situations that would have once compelled him to act, his loss of the specific moral urgency that defined his character in the early seasons, All of it tracks against the documented behavioral presentation of someone whose relationship to meaning and consequence has been fundamentally altered. The alcohol didn't fix the problem. It just made the problem quiet enough to function alongside. Butters is the show's real protagonist. Butters Stotch was introduced as a minor recurring character, a background presence in the friend group, sweet-natured and slightly dim, and mostly useful as a target for the other boys' schemes. He was never supposed to be central. He evolved into one of the most consistent, most psychologically complex, and most narratively important characters the show has ever built. And the theory says this evolution exposed something the writers may not have fully intended when they started it. Butters is the only character in the main group who approaches every situation with genuine, unguarded sincerity. He doesn't have Cartman's manipulative intelligence. He doesn't have Stan's moral framework, or Kyle's sense of justice, or Kenny's resigned fatalism. He has something the show increasingly treats as more valuable and more rare than any of those qualities. He simply believes people are worth caring about. He is hurt, repeatedly, and specifically, by people who exploit that belief. He is grounded by his parents in ways that constitute abuse the show plays for laughs, but that, watched without comedy framing, are genuinely disturbing. And he returns, episode after episode, with the same essential openness intact. Not because he hasn't learned better, but because he has decided, on some level, the show never makes fully explicit that the alternative, becoming Cartman, becoming cynical, becoming someone who protects himself by assuming the worst about everyone, is a cost he isn't willing to pay. The theory says Butters is the show's argument that decency survived everything South Park threw at it. Not innocence, decency. And the show built 25 seasons of comedy around testing whether it would. Randy is South Park's true villain. Randy Marsh is coded across the show's early seasons as a lovable buffoon whose exaggerated responses to minor situations generate the episode's secondary comedic structure while the boys drive the primary plot. He embarrasses Stan at school events. He gets swept up in fads. He makes bad decisions on a reliable schedule. The show asks you to find him endearing in his uselessness. The theory tracks what Randy actually does to the people closest to him across 25 years and arrives at a portrait the comedy framing was specifically designed to prevent you from assembling. He consistently prioritizes his own comfort, his own social standing, his own momentary desires over the well-being of his children. He exposes Stan to situations no responsible parent would allow, repeatedly, without apparent awareness or guilt. His Tegrity Farms arc, in which Randy builds a marijuana empire, documents in extended detail a man willing to compromise his family's stability, his community's relationships, and his son's emotional security in service of a business built on a pun he found funny. The show eventually makes Randy the primary focus of multiple seasons, shifting him from supporting character to lead, and, in doing so, inadvertently confirmed the theory's central argument. The most damaging ongoing force in Stan Marsh's childhood wasn't Cartman's cruelty, or Kenny's recurring death, or the town's weekly catastrophes. It was a father who made every situation about himself and called it personality. The comedy around Randy is real. The theory says what's underneath it is too. Garrison was always running from himself. Mr. Garrison is the most transformed character in South Park's history, cycling through gender identities, sexual identities, teaching positions, and eventually, the presidency of the United States, in a trajectory the show presents as a series of comedic escalations. The theory says the trajectory has a single, consistent underlying logic that the comedy prevents the audience from assembling into a coherent portrait. Garrison has spent his entire documented life running from a specific, early wound the show reveals across multiple flashback episodes. His father did not love him in the way he needed to be loved. The specific shape of that absence, the particular validation that was withheld, generated a man who has spent decades trying on identities the way someone else might try on clothes, looking for the one that finally produces the feeling the original relationship never did. Every transformation Garrison undergoes is not a new direction. It is another attempt at the same destination. The teaching career positions him as an authority figure whose approval carries weight. The relationship history charts a desperate search for someone who will stay. The political career is the most extreme version of the same search, scaled to a national stage, as if the size of the audience could compensate for the specific person who was never in it. The show uses Garrison's transformations as political satire, as shock comedy, as a vehicle for provocative content across multiple seasons. The theory says underneath all of it is a man looking for his father's approval in every available room and never finding it in any of them. The cutaway events are real. South Park operates on a specific formal logic. Within the main story, events have causation and consequence. Characters remember things. Relationships evolve. History accumulates. But the show also contains a category of events that appear to exist outside this logic. Moments of such surreal, disconnected absurdity that the audience accepts them as the show breaking its own rules, rather than as events within the show's actual world. The theory refuses this acceptance for a specific category of seemingly disconnected events, and argues instead that everything that happens in South Park is real within the show's universe, including the events that appear most impossible. The basis for this position is the show's own established rules about what South Park's universe actually contains. A town where Cthulhu mythology is functional reality, where government conspiracies reliably involve actual supernatural elements, where the boys have genuinely traveled to other dimensions, saved the world, and interacted with cosmic-level entities, without anyone treating these events as implausible, does not have a clear basis for distinguishing between possible and impossible. The show has never definitively established what its universe's ceiling is, which means every event the audience reads as surreal comedy may simply be an accurate depiction of a world whose actual parameters include everything the show has ever staged. The boys have saved reality multiple times. The theory says they remember all of it, and the fact that they show up to school the next morning isn't evidence that nothing happened. It's evidence that they've learned how to carry it. Kenny's family knows everything. The McCormick family is South Park's consistent portrait of poverty, a household defined by financial instability, substance abuse, and a casual relationship with danger that the show treats as comic contrast to the relative stability of the other boys' homes. Stuart and Carol McCormick are presented as hapless, negligent, and largely unaware of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding their youngest son. The theory says this presentation is the show's most sustained misdirection. Stuart and Carol McCormick are confirmed, established members of the cult of Cthulhu. Their membership isn't incidental backstory. It is the literal explanation for Kenny's resurrection cycle, the mechanism through which Carol gives birth to him again each time he dies. These are not people who stumbled into a supernatural situation they don't understand. They are active, long-standing participants in a religious organization whose primary documented outcome is their son's immortality. The theory extends from this confirmed detail to its logical implication. Stuart and Carol know exactly what happens to Kenny. They have watched their son die and been present for his return more times than any other characters in the show. The poverty, the neglect, the apparent obliviousness. The theory says these are the behaviors of two people who have been living with an impossible situation for years and have simply run out of ways to process it that don't require them to sit with what their religious choices actually cost their child. The most neglectful parents on television may not be neglectful at all. They may be the most traumatized. The boys know they're in a show. South Park has broken the fourth wall more times and more specifically than almost any other animated series. And the theory built around the accumulation of those breaks says they aren't stylistic choices or isolated meta-jokes. They are the show, documenting the boys' gradual, terrifying awareness that they exist inside a narrative structure rather than a real world. The evidence is assembled across specific episodes rather than inferred from general tone. In multiple instances, the boys demonstrate knowledge of their own episode structure, referring to events that haven't happened yet, or anticipating consequences that only make sense if you understand how the show's formal patterns work. Cartman's direct address moments to the camera go beyond conventional aside, functioning at times as genuine appeals to an audience he appears to know is watching. The show's video game extensions, which are confirmed canonical within the South Park universe, contain explicit mechanics in which the boys interact with and manipulate the narrative structure of their own reality, treating it as a system that can be learned and exploited rather than a world that simply exists. The theory says the boys, particularly Cartman, have developed varying degrees of awareness that their experiences follow patterns too consistent to be random, that consequences reset with suspicious regularity, that the stakes always resolve within a predictable time frame. Some of them have made peace with this, some of them haven't. And the show's willingness to keep staging world-ending events that the boys walk away from without permanent damage is either a comedic format choice or confirmation that at least one of them has figured out the format and is using it. South Park is Peanuts after the world broke. The visual comparison between South Park and Peanuts is old enough that critics stopped remarking on it years ago. Simplified character designs, oversized heads, children navigating a world where adults are largely absent or incompetent. A specific emotional register that oscillates between genuine melancholy and detached comedy without fully committing to either. The theory built around this comparison says it is not a coincidence of aesthetic or a deliberate homage that the creators made and acknowledged. It is the show's actual structural foundation, and the specific delta between Peanuts and South Park is the theory's point. Peanuts gave you Charlie Brown worrying about a kite in a tree, a little red-haired girl who didn't know he existed, a Christmas play that nearly fell apart. The problems were real. The stakes were genuinely felt. The world was navigable. South Park takes the same archetypal children, the neurotic one, the strategic one, the morally earnest one, the one who keeps dying, and drops them into a world that has become exponentially darker and more chaotic than anything the Peanuts universe ever contained. The theory says these aren't different shows. They are the same children in the same universe, separated by enough decades that the world surrounding them has changed beyond recognition. What was a kite stuck in a tree became an alien invasion. What was a school play became a global conspiracy. The kids didn't change. The world did. And South Park has spent 25 seasons asking whether children built for one version of the world can survive inside the version that replaced it.